What is up, mortals? Welcome to Season 3 Part 2 of What If Deku Had Venom. UA had finally completely converted themselves into a boarding school. It took quite a bit of convincing, but most of the UA students were granted permission by their parents in order to live in the school. In the case of Izuku, before he was allowed to stay at UA, he had to somehow gain back his quirk. It was pretty convenient for Detective Tsukachi to arrive during the whole interaction. "It's good to have you back, Venom. It's good to be back, partner." Time flied right before their eyes as they became adjusted to dorm room life. Some events that were worth taking note of during the whole adaptation were that Class 1A ended up having a contest to see which one of them had the best designed room. Most of Class 1A were able to get their provisional hero licenses, with the exceptions being Bakugo and Todoroki, and a couple of the students had actually left the school either of their own accord or because of their parents. Some, like Minta and Hagakure, were of the group who left the school entirely. It was admittedly sad to see them go, but it was understandable. Times had become far more dangerous than they were before, and they'd already been through a lot, so most people put in their position who weren't necessarily all that strong would probably not want to have any part in the school anymore. Ever since then, Class 1A wasn't the same. Some of the students were a bit bummed out when they found out that not all of their friends that they'd made throughout the past year would continue to attend the same school as them. But they refused to focus on the negatives for too long. Not like they could really, because it didn't take very long for them to pick up training again. The teachers had become far more vicious in their training regimen for the students. They were worked down to the core, and the craziest part of all of this was that the students could understand where their teachers were coming from. After all of these events that had happened ever since the beginning of the school year, it made sense that the school would want to produce the best quality heroes they knew their students could be. One day, while the students were in the common room, Aizawa had actually appeared out of his sleeping bag to speak to his class. "Hey, you all, follow me inside the classroom. I'll be talking to you all about your hero work studies. I know you all have been interested in hearing about it for a while now." Hearing this, all of the students jumped and followed their homeroom teacher to the classroom. Pretty much all of them had been anticipating hearing about this specific topic, especially now with everything going on. There were rumors going around about the teachers canceling the whole program, but the students wanted to know if this was indeed true. "By the way, I lied. I won't be the one to talk to you about the hero work studies. Instead, I've brought in a couple of guests who have had personal experience with work studies. They can explain the differences between this program and the hero agency internships." Suddenly, 3 third years walked into the classroom. One had black hair and elf-like ears. He appeared to be a bit shy. The second person of the group was a girl with blue hair that reached down to her waist. She seemed to be quite the bubbly and curious one of the group. Finally, there was a blonde-haired boy who looked like a buffed-up version of Tintin. They introduced themselves as Tamaki Amajiki, Nejire Hato, and Mirio Tagata. They were known as the Big Three of UA. When the younger students heard of this title, this immediately spiked all of their interests, as they had heard about how the Big Three were the best heroes in training with the most potential out of all the third years to make great heroes. If they weren't already all ears, they were certainly now, although they did have to face Nejire's barrage of questions. Izuku's attention was completely on Mirio, though. He practically looked like a mini All Might. Blonde hair, blue eyes, beefy to the bone. He had a feeling that this was All Might's successor. It was incredibly obvious. Yeah, his whole aura is reminiscent of All Might with a couple differences, but primarily like him. Mirio tried to get the class excited by having them chant a phrase, but they simply didn't understand it, which ruined Mirio's plan. He quickly decided to switch up his plans, though, since that introduction fell flat. "How about we do something different? How about all of you get to team up against me in a fight? You know, to see how well all of you stack up against one of us." Before anyone else could get a word out, Bakugo stood up on his desk, setting off explosions in his hands. He yelled at Mirio, "Who do you think you are? You underestimating us? Huh? Well, guess what? I'll be the one to knock you down a peg. You got that, Tintin?" Mirio just smiled at Bakugo, completely unfazed by his rude behavior. Aizawa simply told Bakugo to sit back down unless he wanted to get detention. Bakugo huffed but did as he was told. Aizawa waved off Mirio and the rest of the class. He honestly didn't care. He just told them that he could do whatever he wanted as long as he didn't go too rough on them. Understandable. Right after everyone left, Aizawa pulled out his sleeping bag and took a quick nap. When everyone had changed into their gym uniforms and met up at Gym Gamma, Zero asked Mirio if he was absolutely sure that he wanted to fight the whole class at the same time. Mirio waved him off and laughed, confirming that Mirio was willing to take up the challenge. "So, who wants to go first?" Izuku, Bakugo, and Kirishima all stepped up. The three of them looked at each other, surprised that the others wanted to go first. Ajiro was the most shocked towards Izuku wanting to go first. He was pretty impressed and stood down. Bakugo begrudgingly also stood down, allowing Izuku to go first. Mirio was stretching throughout the whole decision-making process. Izuku walked up to the stadium and also stretched a little. "Oh. So you'll be the first one challenging me. You ready?" Izuku nodded and got into a fighting stance. The rest of Class 1A prepped up their quirks in order to also engage in combat against Mirio. Venom enveloped Izuku and they charged at Mirio. Mirio smirked before most of his clothes fell off besides his boxers. Izuku was in momentary shock when he saw this. It was something Mirio used to his advantage here as he phased down into the ground before he popped right back up. Uppercutting Izuku. This snapped Izuku out of his shock as he shot webs at Mirio, which he just phased through. Oh, he can phase through objects. Interesting. Don't think we've ever had to deal with one of those before. Sorry about the whole clothes falling off thing. My quirk allows me to phase through pretty much anything, which also includes clothes. Only reason why my boxers didn't fall off is because one of my mentors at the time suggested I request some boxers made for me that wouldn't fall off when I use my quirk outside of my hero costume for obvious reasons. Izuku simply nodded before the rest of Class 1A charged at Mirio. Tape, acid, explosions, and several more quirks were used to attack Mirio. But the boy was able to dodge the barrage of unorganized attacks. A punch to the gut, karate chop to the neck, a kick to the side, eye poke fake out. Several attacks from Mirio managed to somehow take down most of Class 1A. The students couldn't understand what this guy's quirk was and what exactly he couldn't do. It was quite a sight to behold. Aizawa stood in the corner watching all of the events pass. He turned his head to see Shoto just watching his classmates get dominated against. "So, you're not going to go out there and fight the guy as well?" Shoto shook his head. "I am not worthy. I failed my provisional exams, so I shouldn't participate," Todoroki responded. Aizawa nodded in understanding before he turned back to see the rest of his class's futile attempts at hitting Mirio. It got so bad to the point there were only about 2 combatants left to face off against Mirio. They were Bakugo Katsuki and Midoriya Izuku with Venom ... So really 3 combatants technically. Izuku tried to formulate a plan on taking down Mirio in his head, but the explosive blonde was already way ahead of Izuku. Bakugo seemed to catch onto Mirio's movements and tried to duke it out with the older boy. Mirio went in to seemingly poke Bakugo in the eyes. Bakugo flinched and closed his eyes. But this attack of Mirio's was a feint. Something else happened though. Mirio phased through the ground and appeared right behind Bakugo. He was about to punch the blonde in the blonde, but Bakugo sent an explosion to the blue-eyed boy's face. Mirio was a bit surprised and made his face intangible in order to have the blast not hit him. Izuku saw this as a quick opportunity to get a shot in as well. He shot his webs at Mirio and they wrapped around Mirio's leg. Mirio looked down to see what grabbed him, but before he could properly realize, Izuku yanked Mirio towards him. Mirio was surprised to see this. He was now in the air and Izuku shot several webs at Mirio. Mirio phased right through all of them, but Izuku headbutted Mirio in the gut right afterwards. He was surprised it even connected. But that moment of happiness disappeared as he was then punched by Mirio in the face. It sent Izuku flying. He crashed into the wall. The force behind the punch was something Izuku wasn't expecting. He knew without a doubt that this was All Might's successor. He pushed himself off of the wall and landed on the ground. Thankfully, he managed to stand on his feet, but they were a bit wobbly. He could hear a couple of his bones pop as he walked back to the stadium. He saw Bakugo try to fight Mirio, but it looked like Bakugo was struggling to even get close to Mirio now. Mirio sent a couple of air punches at Bakugo when the air pressure from the punches seemed to be enough to send Bakugo back. Bakugo was frustrated to say the least. Mirio was already a pain to Bakugo, but now it seemed like the boy was holding back all this time. Where did this strength come from? It was comparable to All Might, but it couldn't be, could it? Bakugo shook his head and flew up into the air. Howitzer impact. Bakugo formed his tornado of fury and was coming down on Mirio. The boy saw this and smiled at Bakugo. This simply infuriated Bakugo even further. But Mirio just phased underneath the ground before he sprung back up. He shot an uppercut to Bakugo's jaw, but from Mirio's tension of the muscles, it appeared as if he held back even then. Bakugo was knocked out from his punch and he was sent crashing down to the floor. Izuku stood there in utter shock. This guy was the definition of overpowered. All of the students who were even able to move after Mirio's onslaught against the first years gathered around the boy. Most were asking what his quirk was and why it seemed like he had a sort of dual quirk like Todoroki and that other hero Captain Celebrity. Mirio was pretty vague on the strength part of his quirk, but he gladly explained the whole thing with his permeation quirk. After he finished talking to the students of Class 1A about how work studies helped him to evolve his quirk to where it was considered top tier among the student populace, he turned to face Izuku. "Hey, Midoriya was it? I'd like to talk to you in private." He knelt down and whispered into Izuku's ear. Once he heard what Mirio whispered, he looked at the older boy and nodded. Thank you all for watching the video to the end. Now there are a few more things that I'd like to go over before the video ends. On behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank the writer for this video, as well as the editors for this video. Their details will be in the description. If you're a voice actor, editor or writer, or you're interested in becoming one of those, go to the Discord that is in the description of this video and hit up the head of one of those areas. We're always looking for members to join us. That's it from us for today's video. So thank you all for watching, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're interested, and hit that like button if you liked the video. Until next time, peace out mortals, have an amazing day.